And I think also that we're very used to thinking in categories, but it's really about a spectrum. So it's easy to do categorization because otherwise we can't do statistics and we can't do analysis, so we break things in. But it really is a spectrum, and we've learned that when we started to do, I'm not an accessibility and mobility impaired accessibility consultant. I don't know whether yellow is better than red or anything like that, but we do know that when we did do those things in public transport, that it wasn't only people who are mobility impaired who benefited, we all benefited. The entire population enjoyed those benefits when we were able to access a wide range of needs. And that's because we sometimes have, I have different needs at different times, and I'm a different person at different times of my life. And just as a personal experience, I can say last year I went through knee surgery. Now I'm very active, I run, I bike, but I had knee surgery, I couldn't get up and down a stair. So it's really, the categories are helpful for analysis, they're not really accurate. And so I think the important thing is to also, because they're easy for us to use, we can actually use these groups to learn about broader benefits that we maybe don't see when we're looking at other things. So, data from Eurostat, 21% of the population is under 19. Another 14% are over 70. And 14% of the adults under 70, in other words, between this, well, it's really between 15 and 70 is the way they do it, but we'll just forgive those 4 years in the middle there that there's some moderate double counting, are listed as having basic activity difficulties or disabilities. This is all of the 28 European countries. I would say this one is a little bit a different year. It's a couple of years behind. This one's kept to date a little bit more frequently. But I really don't think it matters if it's 47% or 49%. I mean, we're just looking at a very large share of the population. And I think that they deserve benefits of mobility too, and I'm just not sure that travel time savings are really addressing their needs at all, or very well. And that would, obviously, we would take the extreme example of a very talented child, cross town to high school. Well, obviously, we don't want it to be 2 hours. Okay, so there is a certain amount of sufficiency that people need. But for the most part, we are talking about populations who are probably making shorter distance trips. And I'm not so sure travel time is really the key element in the way we are used to using it. And this is just numbers from Israel. So I didn't have the numbers on disability here, but only 57% of the population in Israel is between that kind of like working age of 20 to 70, where you really would think that travel time savings has this really important value of productivity and what else I can do. And in Israel, we have less elderly and more children. And then, I hope I'm not going too fast, but I'm trying to make up for some of the time. So now, wait a minute, is this a network issue or is this a social issue? And I really think that that's an important thing to think about. These numbers were taken from various European studies on children and their trip to school, and we're driving them to school at increasing rates. And it's traced over time. You can see there's actually an amazing longitudinal study that looks at what's happened in England and Germany and then broadens over time. And you can see it just keeps going up. Countries where it was acceptable for kids to take public transport or to walk to school are decreasing that range. And they're more and more driving them. And we really need to think about why are we driving them. And there's no question that if you talk about disadvantages of other people's transport, so, okay, we're used to thinking about CO2 and noise and air, but I don't know if we realize that by making transportation quicker, we are making it more dangerous or less hospitable for other users, for all those other 49% of the users. The systems just, and there's a study that said, there are people who would say, I would love to walk to work, I just can't because the highways break up the space, or the cars are traveling very quick and I don't feel comfortable on the street. The street is not accepting of me as a pedestrian or as a biker. And so by constantly affecting these issues, and when we look at travel time savings, it's not just about the investments, it's also about the way we design our traffic lights. So crossing the street starts to become a real big problem. And this is, it is, who said diversity? Well, this is reducing diversity, okay? Because we have diverse users, and if we're focused on, even at the micro level, making things quicker, we are excluding other people. This is something you were talking about, the ultra-orthodox in Jerusalem. Hello, back there. So this is a study of Tel Aviv metropolitan area, a recent travel habit survey that was completed in 2014. The colors are not coming across really well, I'm sorry. Maybe somebody could maybe turn off the lights. So Israel, we actually have a very Tel Aviv metropolitan area is a large area. This was a survey of the 14 largest cities in the metropolitan area. And what is differentiating between these children's movements is actually not so much the physical environment, which we're used to thinking about, because all of the areas that were surveyed were really city center areas with connected streets and sidewalks, and some a little nicer, some a little less nice, but not a grand difference. We weren't looking at extreme suburbs. They weren't included. And if you look at what's happening is, first of all, 32% of the kids had no walk trips at all. None. They didn't walk, okay? Anywhere during the day. It's a crazy thing. But look at what happened when we went to this ultra-Orthodox community. And there, the whole community walks. They don't really own cars. In this community, 85 to 90%, I don't remember the numbers exactly, but once you had kids, you had a car in the secular community. But here, almost nobody owns a car. And the whole community walks. And part of what's happening here is also that this community is also what we would call a very porous community. Okay? They're very connected to the people who live around them. They have very large families. They have, and when you ask these people why don't they let their kids walk to school, they'll say it's dangerous. Okay, well, the traffic safety level for these people is no different, so it's a perception. But the porousness of the community, of the families to the community, it's an insulated community, but the families are porous. That's what I'm trying to say. Whereas here, the families will be more insulated. These kids just know that they go to the street corner and they'll ask somebody to help them cross the street. Or they know the store owner, and they can get help along the way. So what we're also noticing is that there's a cultural impact of how people relate to the same transport infrastructure. Children's walk, the distribution of children by how many trips they make by walking. It also included bike, but it was not, there's almost no biking. One of the interesting things is the little bit of a place where there is walking and biking, one of the places where there is some biking for children is you will find that there's a difference between boys and girls. And that's one of the things that also we need to think about, and I wanted to say earlier, is to call women a special population is almost as ridiculous as saying, if we would have taken that 49% and then added the women between. But the truth is not calling it a special population doesn't mean that they don't have needs that aren't being answered. But they are 50% of the population, and that's another thing that we have to take into account. Anyway, girls and boys, you will see at a very young age, this difference coming in biking. So whoever was talking about biking, women don't bike. Girls don't bike. And one of the things that comes across is girls prefer a more social engagement. And so where they will be active, they will walk, whereas boys will bike. So there's also, this is a gender difference. I bike, but my daughter won't bike. She likes to walk and talk. One of the things also that we will know about all of those populations that I was listing is perceived security, safety, convenience, assistance is going to be really important for them, more than travel time savings. So again, I don't think that we really need to consider whether the child going to the local school is saving 30 seconds in walk time. Right? That one's not the one. But we are going to, and it's also not about the objective sense of traffic accidents. It's going to be the subjective perception of is it comfortable, convenient, and safe for someone to walk and for my child to walk. So again, that's really the focus that we need to think about to make something a reasonable choice. And the issue of assistance, you mentioned using apps, but for instance, ordering your taxi, you need to have a credit card. Okay? Maybe the information ones, you know, if you're a little bit literate, you can use and you can figure out, but there are populations without credit cards. So that's another issue. Now, just obviously, we're very concerned about access to goods and services, and if we talk about technology, so I want to ask, would this be good? Would it be good to do online schooling, work from home, Amazon shop, and have it delivered by, you know, those new flying things, then get computerized medical diagnosis, so only if I really have something serious I would need to leave. I have virtual communities and friends, and I have home entertainment. Is that good? Is that what we want? Because I've got all the access to my goods and services.
It's good, but not enough.
Yeah. Ah, okay.
I mean, having the option is good.
Having the option is good.
I mean, having only those options is probably not better.
Would we want to stop transportation services, like, or reduce them, or limit them? I don't think so. I think we're looking at something more. And this is, I want to just, and I think popular culture, actually today on a bus, while I was waiting for the bus, there was a quote from Danny Kaye that was basically saying the same thing. And if we look at popular culture, and this one is a little bit more sophisticated, but Danny Kaye is, if anybody knows, he's from the 1950s, I think, American comedian, very... Anyway, but so he said it in a kind of cute way, and Dr. Seuss has a book, Oh, the Places You Will Go, but I chose this one this time. I mean, they're endless that you can see in popular culture. As you set out for Ithaca, hope your road is a long one, full of adventure, full of discovery. Ithaca gave you the marvelous journey. Without her, you would not have set out. She has nothing left to give you now. So obviously, there's an issue of on the way. It's not, and if I don't have any place to go, I may not make the effort to get up and go, so I need kind of a destination function. But the on the way is also really important, and I think that when we look at, you know, not just the social sciences, but the humanities, they also have something to tell us, a truth that we all know, but we don't measure. So, what else is mobility? Okay, goods and services, we can solve it by never move. I mean, I don't think we're there yet, and it's still an issue, and I don't think we've solved it, and not everybody has equal access to goods and services. So I'm not trying to underplay that. I'm trying to add another perspective. Okay, and I think that first of all, mobility is a basic human freedom. We are mobile. We have two legs. They walk. That's what we do. It's something that we do. And if we look at last time, I think, or a few times ago, somebody mentioned Sen's capability approach. I think mobility is a functioning. It's a basic human functioning of its own right that we need to think about. Obviously, there's health and wellness. So we have that we get out of the travel itself. So maybe that's kind of like a time density thing. There's social and psychological well-being. We feel better about ourselves, we're more integrated. We're more open to others when we move, when we engage, when we're out there. I mean, why is it the renaissance of cities? Because it is this, meeting and seeing and being seen that makes us open to a broader perspective on the world. We can talk about skills and trip making, spatial orientation, using apps, getting technology, coping skills, handling the unexpected, my identity, who I am, and that again goes back maybe to what I found this morning, the universality of what it's like to use public transport everywhere, but the differences that you find in the local flavors, and so we have an identity issue. Learning and imagination, and especially this is for children, when we allow them freedom of movement and we allow them, our childhood has become more and more institutionalized. We don't go down to the corner and kick around a soccer ball, we now go to soccer team. Okay, and so mobility is the same thing now. We have eliminated their freedom to explore and to learn. Now, it doesn't mean there isn't something to learn from being on the soccer team, and there's also something you learn or you engage in being in the car, but it's different. And we need to understand what is the impact of those differences. Autonomy, independence, self-reliance, self-assurance, these are things that help us function in the world, and mobility contributes to them. It's not the only way. Obviously, skills, school's a good way to get some skills, but they're different skills. So I want to talk about an idea called eudaimonia, the idea of living a well-lived life. And there are two measures, scales, that they use in psychology. One is a three, and one is 6. And they relate to how much we can do with our lives. What is our range? And now autonomy, for example, one of the things that they talk about is also cultural impacts. So if we say that in mobility, I had the pleasure and the honor of working in a Bedouin community, and we had wanted to do buses where we would let people just kind of raise a finger and get the bus, but the girls couldn't wait at a corner if it wasn't an official bus stop, because it's a very traditional community with gender differences, big time. So autonomy is an issue that has a cultural context of what I do or what I don't do. Maybe I don't ride a motorcycle because I'm a woman and I kind of don't see my girlfriends doing it. So there's cultural and social impacts. What my parents would allow me to do if I'm a child. I mean, parents really negotiate their children's mobility. So we can look at these different things and think about mobility in each of the contexts and the way it is an important part of allowing people these kinds of freedoms, not only also for where they can go and what they can do in terms of jobs and schools and shop and culture, but also for it in its own right and the way it enhances us as people. So we had to answer 2 simultaneous questions then when we want to look at how we look at this issue. So one is, what is societal progress? So we have the hedonic school of thought, which is the utility measures and subjective well-being and pleasure, and those are good things too. These are things that we need to leave in the equation. I'm not suggesting we take them out. They're both important. But we also can consider, and this is maybe a little more challenging, is looking at issues of eudaimotic well-being or personal well-being in those contexts. But then now we need to also add another dimension, which is, what does transport do? And so one is, it's an instrument. So it's how we get places that we need to go and things that we need to do or want to do or enjoy doing. But there's also an intrinsic element, which is the on-the-way kind of way of looking at things. So how do we have it all? So it's a little bit oversimplifying, I understand, but I did try to bring it together, because otherwise it can be very complicated to think about all these things together. So the hedonic and the instrumental is kind of our common practice, right? That's our travel time savings. We've got to get someplace, and I have utility from getting there faster or more reliably and that stuff. Then there is a little bit of a look now also at subjective well-being in the intrinsic value. I enjoy going along the park and seeing nice scenery, or kind of relaxing on the train and watching the scenery go by. And then accessibility really talks about opportunities and openness, and I think it goes in the eudaimotic realm more than the hedonic realm, but could be argued, but that's where I put it for now. And then I think that what's missing then is just this one, which is the intrinsic with the eudaimotic, which is the on-the-way benefit. Is there evidence for yes? 1 minute. Okay, so I'm going to go very quickly. And the evidence is still anecdotal. I mean, we kind of know it. We kind of read, I brought the humanities. There's stories of, say, foreign exchange students where we think that it's not just about getting a great grade when they go abroad, right? I mean, we're talking about the openness, the experience, the travel, the spatial openness that they gain. Business travelers clearly think that they get status and all these things out of it, and not just the meeting, right? I mean, otherwise they would do it by video. And we're kind of aware also of the low mobility, which are the children, the elderly, and the mobility impaired, that for them really what we want to do is the trip is the point. Okay? In a lot of ways, the point isn't just for kids to go to school, it's the way they get to school that we think is important, that they should be biking, they should be walking, and and also for elderly to get them out of the house. To, if it takes an extra 5 minutes, maybe that's an advantage that they've been out of their secluded space. So it's really anecdotal, and we're missing also the middle group. And here it's much harder to define, and I think that if we look, maybe if we look at the edges, we'll be able to define the middle.
What do we miss? Would you say the middle?
Well, I mean, some of us are not here and not here, right? There are a whole bunch of people who are kind of, they're not foreign exchange students and they're not business travelers. They're kind of here, okay? They're not children and elderly. I mean, there were some other percentages off the screen that I didn't mention. And I think women in particular would be someplace here. And looking at the differences in women's mobility here, who feels more confident? How does their own self-confidence work with their choices? And what does it mean for them in their own ability to realize self-realization, and not necessarily just in career development, but in self-realization.
And there's a connection to the brotherhood. They're the main group that actually helps the people with low income, the children, the people.
Anyway, I'm just going to, because I have 1 minute, so I'm just going to go back. This is my conclusion. So we really need to think about certainly the accessibility to activities, goods, and services is an inclusive way of looking, but maybe also asking the next question as well, which relates back to the well-being that you had mentioned. So I hope I was within time. Thank you very much.